Bonjour. Today, I want to talk about how to improve your French. This is addressed primarily to people who already have at least an intermediate level in French and would like to improve. And we all know that there's that long period when we sort of migrate from B1 to B2 where we're facing the headwinds and we're not advancing as quickly as we could. And the reason why I want to talk about improving French is because Canada has a new Prime Minister, Mark Carney, who is an Anglophone. And in Canada, of course, Prime Ministers have to be able to speak both official languages, as do most federal politicians in that leadership position. And so I want to look at Mark Carney's French and some of the suggestions that I would give Mark Carney if I were in a position to advise him on his French. And I think this might be applicable to a lot of French, non-native speakers. First of all, let's say that Mark Carney's French, in my opinion, is very good. It's very pleasant to listen to, and that should be the first goal. He makes mistakes with gender. He makes a lot of mistakes, but it's pleasing. He's got a nice cadence in his French, and it's French that he learned. Apparently, he learned it while he was at Harvard. He had to speak French as a governor of the Bank of Canada. So he was in a number of situations where he needed to speak French. So he obviously put some effort into it. But he is not someone who grew up in a French environment. We have had prime ministers in Canada who grew up in, bilingual families like Justin Trudeau, like Jean Charest, like Brian Mulroney, who are absolutely fluently bilingual. And there are many such examples in Canada, but Mark Carney is not one of them. So first, I'll let you listen to an interview that he did before he became Prime Minister. And this was my first opportunity to hear him in French. So let's listen to that.
Manière qui avoir le plus grand impact sur les Américains et le moyen d'ici. C'est une guerre commerciale. Et ça fait du mal ici, ça fait du mal là-bas. Et ça vaut mieux d'avoir un accord, mais on doit protéger les intérêts des Canadiens, des Canadiens.
So some of my comments there. Oh, and by the way, I will also invite you to listen to Jodie Foster later on, who is an American actress whose French is phenomenal, and yet still makes mistakes with gender. And I use her as an example of just how fluent a person can become in another language and yet still not be perfect, which is, I think, the case for most people who learn foreign languages as adults. So first comment with regard to Mark Carney is that he has a good vocabulary. He seems to understand everything that's said to him, which is, oral comprehension. Listening comprehension is the number one goal. If you can't understand what people are saying to you, you're not going to be able to maintain a conversation. He does that, and he does it on a range of subjects, and he's able to answer the questions appropriately, and he has enough vocabulary that he can retrieve in order to participate in this relatively sophisticated conversation. Of course, we can always work to increase our vocabulary, and I have found that listening to audiobooks in literature on a variety of subjects and looking to pick up a few more words, hearing them in different contexts, all of that helps to upgrade our language level and improves our vocabulary. But on vocabulary, I give them full marks. Now, the next subject is when we go to speak, then we need to find words, of course. We need words in order to express our ideas, but we also need structure. And there, I think it's important to develop certain patterns, certain structures that we know work, that we're confident that we can use. And in that regard, Mark Carney keeps saying, ça vaut mieux.
Et ça vaut mieux d'avoir un accord, mais on doit protéger les intérêts des Canadiens, des Canadiens.
Which is close, but he really means il vaut mieux. In other words, it is better. Ça vaut mieux is more if you say, this is better than that. Ça vaut mieux que ceci. Whereas if you're saying it's better, il vaut mieux, il vaut mieux. It's a minor thing. It's perfectly understood. But if we are looking to refine our language and to make it more natural, we should use as many natural expressions as possible. But usually we don't. So in my own case, I speak French quite well, and I have caught myself on many occasions when I want to say in my opinion, which is something we say quite often. I find myself saying de mon avis, which is wrong. It should be à mon avis. So we are always using structures, I think, as non-native speakers that either come from our own language or because we have developed certain habits. And every so often we need to reassess some of the structures that we often use, which may not be the most natural usage. And to have sort of an inventory of structures that we know we can use so we can pull them out when we need them. On the subject of structure, I also think that in French, it's a good idea to use the pronouns and to use them correctly. That means in the right order. So here's a table table that came from, I think, Babel languages, and it seems to me it has a mistake on it. But if I look at the table, this table shows the order in which, pronouns are used in a sentence. You have to follow this order. You can't reverse the order. It's interesting that there seems to be a typo in this table, which illustrates the fact that when it comes to language, there are always errors. Errors in explanation, errors in examples, errors in usage. We needn't get too worried about it. However, I do recommend using pronouns as effectively as possible, putting an effort into getting them right, and in particular using the pronouns en and I. So en is of it, I is to it, and wherever we can find these and maybe study the sentence and save these phrases, whenever we can introduce these pronouns that are somewhat unique to French, it makes our French more natural. So put a special effort when it comes to pronouns into using en and I. Now I want to get into two areas that are sort of at the crux of what makes French difficult. The first is gender, and the second is pronunciation. So when we listen to Mark Carney, we see that he often gets his genders wrong. But if we listen to someone like Jodie Foster, whose pronunciation is perfect, in my opinion, she also makes mistakes with gender. That's not surprising. We don't have gender in English. So whenever you're dealing with something that exists in another language that doesn't exist in your own language, you're going to have trouble developing these new habits. So in order to increase the likelihood that you will get the gender right, the first thing you can do is look up the rules. So in French, any noun that ends in ment or age is going to be masculine. If it ends in ion, and very often if it ends in e, it's going to be feminine, but not always. And that's why, for example, I will often, if I'm uncertain about the gender of a noun, I will refer to Spanish. Because if you say grammaire, grammar, in French, or if you say vocabulaire, vocabulary. Well, grammaire, I think of Spanish, gramatica versus vocabulaire, vocabulario. So in Spanish, it's clearer if it's an O or if it's an A. A is feminine, O is masculine. In French, nouns that end in E could go either way. So I will often refer to the Spanish. But again, it's not something that's natural that I automatically do. The gender comes out in some form or other. The more I listen, the more I read, the more I speak, the higher the percentage of nouns that come out correctly. Now, other things you can do to improve the likelihood of correct gender. Make sure when you, for example, if you're using link, save the noun with the article. So, la plume, la maison. Always include the la or the ma, the my. And where possible, include the adjective. So, you could say une maison excellente. Because if you say excellente, then you have to have, it's a feminine form of excellent. And therefore, by forcing yourself to pronounce the feminine adjective, you're improving your pronunciation and you're sort of solidifying the fact in your brain that this is a feminine noun. I should point out that it's sometimes a little confusing, but if you say my friend in French, if it's a masculine friend, of course, mon is the masculine, mon ami. But if it's a feminine friend, you can also say mon ami, mon amie, because the E then at the end of the A-M-I-E, amie, makes it a female friend. And so very often in French, to make it clear that you're talking about your girlfriend, you would say ma petite amie. But if it's just my friend feminine, it's mon ami. So because the French don't want to have ma amie, they say mon ami. So these are some of the things that we sort of get used to and which can confuse us when it comes to gender. And I think that if we can train ourselves to pronounce clearly, it will improve our accuracy in gender. So one of the problems we have in English is that our vowels are often not very clear. So in a word where we have two syllables, one of those syllables, the vowel will not be clearly spoken. Spoken, n, it's not n, spoken. But in French, every syllable, in principle, has to have the vowel clearly enunciated. So in the excerpt from Carney's talk in front of the Élysée Palace with Macron, with President Macron, if I'm not mistaken, I can't remember which one, but it's toujours, it's Macron. Every syllable has to get the full value of that vowel. And if that noun or adjective is feminine, then we want to make sure that we pronounce it as clearly as possible. I use the example of excellente. Let's hear that at the end. Let's force ourselves to clearly enunciate every vowel. And that'll then force us to pronounce the feminine version of the adjective or the noun, and it makes our pronunciation clearer and also reminds us of the gender of that noun or adjective. Now, while we're on the subject of vowels, in French we have these nasal vowels. Un, on. And we have to be very clear as to which nasal sound we are using. We should practice these, and you may find in listening to French from different parts of the French-speaking world, from Paris, from the southern part of France, from Quebec, elsewhere, Africa, I don't know, that to some extent these wander. Just as in English, the vowels are pronounced a little bit differently in different parts of the world. But you should be consistent. And so if you're saying in Quebec, for example, la belle province, that's not la Provence, which is a region in France. So the on and the un are different sounds. And like one, is sometimes these days pronounced un. So there's some wandering in these vowel sounds, but you should be consistent. And when it's une, like one of something, make a point of clearly saying une for the feminine form of which Mark Carney sometimes doesn't do. He just gives it a or something that misses it. You've got to hit it with the full une. And I think the more clearly you pronounce your vowels, the better you will do with gender. Now, another sound that's difficult for some people in French is the guttural R. You don't have to use the guttural R. There are parts of the French-speaking world, like Quebec, where some people have a trilled R, more like a Spanish R, but that's a minority. Most people, in fact, have a guttural R. I have found that it's difficult for me to pronounce the guttural R after certain consonants. So, for example, if I pronounce the name of the place where I live in Canada, La Colombie-Britannique, if I say it quickly, for whatever reason, I find it difficult. That the R coming right after B is difficult. So what I do is if I'm going to say La Colombie-Britannique, I slow down, because if I try to do it too quickly, I will stumble. And so that's another suggestion I have, in that because in French, the vowels have to be pronounced clearly, the consonants, obviously, and the guttural R should be pronounced clearly. You can sense when you are approaching a sound that you may have difficulty with, slow down. The more pressure we put on ourselves, the less well we do. Pronouncing the vowels correctly is going to improve your accuracy in gender, in my opinion. Slowing down is going to improve your ability to pronounce these sounds correctly, so just slow down. And I have noticed even with Mark Carney, in his casual interview, he was better. And then I've seen him give certain speeches in Canada in French where he gets carried away with the message he's trying to deliver. And so because in English, we use emphasis to make certain points. So we will say that's absolutely the case, or we want to make certain points. In French, that emphasis is different. We would say absolument. Like the French is somewhat more monotonous, and the intonation in English is quite different from the intonation in French. The more we are trying to sort of defend a certain position or convince people or make certain points, the greater the likelihood that we will introduce English intonation. So therefore, again, slow down. Try to be more calm, and you will end up speaking better French and therefore be, in the end, more persuasive. Now, a great place to review all of this is sentence mode in Link, where you can get a hold of sentences that you think contain a lot of the sounds and the intonation that you want to be able to use. Go into that sentence, use the matching pairs to make sure you know the words there, that you understand the meaning of these words. You might want to reconstitute the sentence. And then there's an opportunity to listen to the sentence and then pronounce the sentence. You can listen to it more than once, pronounce it more than once, practice the intonation, practice really nailing those vowel sounds, nailing the guttural R sound. And in that way, I think not only will the overall impression created with your French improve, your pronunciation will improve, but also I think that if you can nail that, then your accuracy in the language will improve. And I think I would end with this short excerpt from Jodie Foster speaking French.
Parce que j'ai vécu quand même une vie entre guillemets pas normale, mais j'étais pas un surdoué, j'étais pas plus intelligent que les autres, j'étais seulement dans un métier assez prodige, quoi.
And her pronunciation is excellent, even though she makes the odd mistake with gender. But she is an actress. And as an actress, her profession is one of imitating or putting herself into the role of someone else. So if we can learn to be a bit more like Jodie Foster and project ourselves into the role of a French person, imagine ourselves as a French woman or a French man, that attitude is going to help us speak French better, pronounce it better. If we pronounce it better, we'll have better phrasing, we'll have better intonation, and we'll speak more accurately. So those are some of the things that I guess I would tell Mark Carney. Of course, he's not going to listen to me. I thought that his remarks in front of the Élysée Palace with President Macron were very well delivered. I thought he actually improved from what I heard in Canada before he went over. And I'm sure he spent some time on the airplane practicing.
Les Canadiens et les Canadiennes aiment la France. Et ça, c'est la raison pour laquelle Je suis ici pour ma première visite officielle en tant que Premier ministre.
Thank you for listening. Bye for now.